Ask a room full of hip-hop fans why Ja Rule vanished from the top of the charts, and almost everyone reaches for the same two words, 50 Cent. It is a story that gets repeated at parties, in YouTube comments, and in every whatever happened to thread on the internet. It is clean, it is dramatic, and it has a clear winner and a clear loser. Once a story like that sets in the public imagination, it is nearly impossible to dislodge, no matter how many other facts get buried underneath it. It is also only a fraction of what actually happened. The real answer involves a federal investigation, a record label collapsing from the inside, 2 separate prison sentences, and one of the most infamous scams in modern entertainment history. To understand how a man who once opened albums at #1 ended up better known for a soggy cheese sandwich on a Bahamian island, you have to go back to Queens, to a childhood that had very little to do with fame at all. Jeffrey Bruce Atkins was born on February 29, 1976, in Hollis, Queens, and grew up in a household stretched thin by money trouble. Before he was signing record deals, he was, by his own later admission, selling drugs on the same corners that shaped so many of his neighborhood's rappers. Music became his way out. He signed to Irv Gotti's Murder Incorporated Records, an imprint of Def Jam, and released his debut album Veni Vedi Vecchi in 1999, which went platinum behind the single Holla Holla. 2 more albums followed in quick succession, and by 2001 he was everywhere. #1 singles like Always on Time, with Ashanti, guest verses on Jennifer Lopez's I'm Real, and Ain't It Funny, Grammy nominations, and a run of triple platinum success that made him one of the defining sounds of the era. That total saturation, the very thing that made him a star, would soon give his rivals an opening. He came up on the same blocks as another young rapper who would later become his most famous rival, Curtis Jackson, known to the world as 50 Cent. In the late 1990s, the two were not strangers trading insults from a distance. They knew each other's circles. And when tension started, it started personally, not professionally. Accounts differ on exactly how it began. Some point to a robbery and a stolen chain that Ja Rule's camp blamed on 50 Cent's crew. Others point to a violent altercation in which one of Ja Rule's associates allegedly stabbed 50 Cent, whichever version is closer to the truth. The outcome was the same. 2 men who grew up near each other now treated each other as enemies, and the neighborhood had picked sides. For a while, the conflict stayed mostly beneath the surface, showing up as a stray line here or a subliminal jab there. Ja Rule had every reason to ignore it. By the early 2000s, he was the far bigger name, riding hits like Always on Time and Mesmerize to the top of the charts, while 50 Cent was still building buzz through mixtapes without a major platform behind him. He was grinding on the New York mixtape circuit, building a reputation as a fearless, uncompromising street rapper, but he did not yet have a label willing to release his music at scale, and for a stretch it looked as though the gap between the 2 men might simply be permanent. That gap closed fast, and part of what closed it was 50 Cent's willingness to keep naming Ja Rule directly, track after track, long before Ja Rule treated him as a serious threat. By 2002, the beef went fully public, and in 2003, Ja Rule made the move people still talk about 2 decades later. A diss record called Loose Change that went after not just 50 Cent, but Eminem, Dr. Dre, and Busta Rhymes on the same track. It was an enormous swing. Eminem was the biggest rapper alive. Dr. Dre was arguably the most respected producer in the business. Busta Rhymes was a battle-tested veteran with real industry weight. Taking on all of them at once looked less like confidence, and more like a man picking a fight with the entire room. Some observers at the time read it as an attempt to overwhelm 50 Cent by association, drag his allies into the fight before they had fully committed, and end the whole conflict in one decisive blow. Instead, it gave every one of those artists a reason to answer, and none of them needed much encouragement. 50 Cent did not answer alone. His response featured Eminem and Busta Rhymes standing beside him. The exact artist Ja Rule had just attacked, now firing back as a unit. The math had flipped overnight. 50 Cent had G-Unit behind him as a genuine movement, and he was signed through Eminem's Shady Records and Dr. Dre's Aftermath, both sitting inside the far larger Interscope machine, with the marketing budget and radio muscle that came with it. Ja Rule was not fighting one rapper anymore. He was fighting a label structure. There was also a style problem that worked against him. His biggest hits leaned melodic, built on R&B hooks and duets with singers like Ashanti and Jennifer Lopez, which made him massive on pop radio but gave critics an easy angle in a genre that prized toughness above almost anything. 50 Cent, by contrast, sounded cold and street, exactly the tone the moment rewarded. The timing made everything worse. 50 Cent's debut album, Get Rich or Die Tryin', landed in February 2003 with enormous force, right as the feud was at its loudest. Ja Rule's answer record, Blood in My Eye, arrived that November and sold well below his earlier peaks. His 2004 follow-up, RULE, also fell short of the numbers he was used to. For an artist who had opened albums with first-week sales in the hundreds of thousands and stacked platinum plaques as a matter of routine, the drop was steep and it was public. The internet flattened the whole saga into one sentence that still circulates today. 50 Cent ended Ja Rule's career. It is short, it is satisfying, and it is incomplete. Here is what that sentence leaves out. While the two rappers were trading songs in public, something far more damaging was happening in private. Ja Rule's entire career ran through one company, Murder Incorporated Records, founded by Irv Gotti as an imprint of Def Jam. Every hit, every video, every radio push flowed through that label, which meant that when the label got hit, he got hit with it. On January 3, 2003, agents from the FBI and NYPD raided Murder Incorporated's Manhattan offices as part of a year-long investigation into the label's ties to Kenneth Supreme McGriff, a Queens drug figure suspected of funneling more than $1 million in illicit cash through the company. The raid happened in the exact same stretch of weeks that the 50 Cent feud was reaching its loudest point. That overlap was not a coincidence of bad luck stacking on top of bad luck. It was one continuous crisis hitting from two directions at once. And it is genuinely difficult to overstate how much that mattered. An artist cannot run a normal album cycle, book a press tour, and drop disc records while federal agents are combing through his label's financial records. Adding to the chaos, Murder Incorporated Vice President Chris Gotti was shot in the leg outside the label's Manhattan headquarters that same February, an incident that only deepened the sense that the company was under siege from every direction. As the investigation dragged on, support from Def Jam and its parent company Universal cooled noticeably, since no corporate partner wants to be publicly linked to a money laundering probe. The promotional machine that had once pushed Ja Rule to #1 simply slowed down. By the end of March 2003, Murder Incorporated was forced out of its offices at One Worldwide Plaza, the same Def Jam building it had operated from since its founding. The investigation eventually produced formal charges. In January 2005, Irv Gotti and his brother Chris surrendered to authorities and were indicted on money laundering and conspiracy charges tied to the McGriff connection. The case went to trial later that year, and in December 2005, a jury acquitted both brothers of all counts. It was a legal vindication, but it came 2 full years after the raid first froze the label's operations, and by the time the Gotti brothers were cleared, the commercial window that had made Ja Rule a dominant chart force had already closed. In 2007, he founded his own label, the Incorporated/Empire Music Group, an attempt to build a smaller, independent version of the machine he had lost. It kept him working, but it could not replace the reach of a major label at full strength. Legal trouble kept following him personally, separate from the label. He had faced a 2003 assault case in Toronto, and in July 2007, police pulled over a car he was riding in on Manhattan's Upper West Side and found a loaded, semi-automatic handgun with its serial number filed off. That case moved slowly through the courts for years, partly stalled by pre-trial motions over whether the weapon could even be used as evidence. In December 2010, Ja Rule pleaded guilty to attempted criminal possession of a weapon and was sentenced to 2 years in New York State Prison. He surrendered in June 2011, first to Rikers Island, one of the most notoriously difficult jail complexes in the country, and then to a state facility upstate. While that case was working its way through the system, federal prosecutors in New Jersey were building an entirely separate case against him for failing to file tax returns on more than $3 million he earned between 2004 and 2006, income that had continued flowing in from touring and royalties, even as his chart presence cooled. In March 2011, he pleaded guilty to that charge as well, And that July, while already in custody on the weapons case, he was sentenced to an additional 28 months in federal prison, ordered to pay $1.1 million in back taxes, and told the sentence would run concurrently with his state time so that it would not add extra years behind bars. Appearing in court in a yellow prison jumpsuit and restraints, he told the judge that youth, bad advice, and an inability to manage sudden wealth had led him there, insisting he had never intended to defraud the government and had simply failed to properly account for money moving through his career at its peak. He did not go completely silent behind bars. He earned his GED in February 2012, finishing schooling he had missed as a teenager in Queens, and his album Pain is Love Too was released to the public in February 2012 while he was still incarcerated, meaning he could not tour it or promote it in any normal way. He was released from custody in May 2013, stepping back into an industry that had moved on without him. New artists had taken over the radio, the culture had shifted, and the gap he needed to close had only grown wider while he was gone. Then came the moment that would define his public image for an entirely new generation, one that had nothing to do with rapping at all. In 2016 and 2017, Ja Rule co-founded Fyre Festival with a young entrepreneur named Billy McFarland, pitched as the most exclusive party on earth, staged on a private stretch of the Bahamian island of Exuma. The marketing campaign was built around glossy images of models and influencers posted simultaneously across social media, promising luxury villas, gourmet dining, and top musical acts on a remote, postcard-perfect island. There were no prices listed and no fine print in those early posts, just the suggestion of a status symbol that money and connections could buy. Ja Rule promoted it heavily to his massive social following, and for many buyers, his name attached to the project functioned as its own form of reassurance. Attendees paid thousands of dollars expecting a 5-star weekend on private beaches with chef-prepared meals and private transport. What they found on arrival in April 2017 were disaster relief tents standing in for villas, rain-soaked mattresses scattered across the grounds, and a promised gourmet meal that turned out to be 2 slices of bread, a slice of cheese, and a small salad in a styrofoam box. The image of that sandwich spread across the internet within hours and became shorthand for the entire disaster. Guests were effectively stranded on the island overnight with little organization, no functioning security, limited flights out, and almost no way home. The same social platforms that had sold the fantasy the week before turned on it in real time, and within a single news cycle, the word fire had become internet shorthand for a luxury scam. The fallout was swift and severe. Billy McFarland was later convicted of wire fraud connected to the festival and served time in federal prison. Ja Rule, who maintained that he too had been misled by McFarland and was himself a victim of the fraud rather than one of its architects, was named alongside McFarland in a class action lawsuit seeking $100 million in damages from attendees. In 2019, a judge dismissed him from that key lawsuit, ruling there was insufficient evidence that his social media promotion had directly caused people to buy tickets. Legally, he walked away without criminal charges, while McFarland, who had controlled the festival's finances, went to prison. Culturally, the verdict was far less forgiving. 2 documentaries, one from Netflix and one from Hulu, retold the Fyre Festival story to millions of viewers in unflinching detail within months of each other in early 2019. And for a huge portion of that audience, the festival became the only version of Ja Rule they had ever known. The hitmaker who had once dominated pop radio was now, to a new generation, simply the Fyre Festival guy. And online debate about how much he genuinely knew in advance has never fully settled, even years later. And yet the story did not end there, which is the part the disappearance narrative tends to skip. In 2021, Ja Rule faced Fat Joe in a Versus matchup at Madison Square Garden, and the crowd response reminded everyone that the catalog still worked live, song for song. It was received by many writers as a partial resurrection rather than a full return to the top of the charts, but the language itself mattered. You do not describe something as coming back from the dead unless a large part of the audience had assumed it was gone for good. Since then, he has kept building rather than hiding. He launched a live streaming and talent platform called Icon Live that later reached Apple TV, giving him a foothold in tech and media well outside of recording booths and tour buses. In 2022, he and Irv Gotti served as executive producers on the Murder Incorporated story, a 5-part BET docuseries that revisited the label's rise, its federal investigation, and its long, messy comeback, with contributions from figures including Ashanti, Fat Joe, and Jay-Z. It gave Ja Rule a rare chance to help shape how his own history got told, rather than leaving that story entirely to internet clips and old headlines. By several industry reports, he also continued to earn substantial money from masters and royalty deals tied to his old catalog, proof that the songs 50 Cent supposedly buried were still generating real income 2 decades later. He expanded into business outside of music entirely, launching a wine label called Rose Vine Cellars in 2023 and a whiskey brand called Amber and Opal in January 2025, moving from a single hit-driven income stream towards something closer to a diversified portfolio. He performed at a nationally televised WNBA halftime show in 2024, hardly the booking of a man the culture had quietly erased. That same year, however, his past caught up with him again in a very concrete way. In February 2024, British authorities denied him entry into the United Kingdom just days before the opening dates of his international Sunrise Tour, citing his criminal record under UK immigration rules that restrict entry for convictions carrying sentences of 2 years or more. He said on social media that he had spent $500,000 of his own money producing the tour, only to have it cancelled at the last minute, with venues in cities including Cardiff, London, Nottingham, and Liverpool left showing the dates as cancelled. So did Ja Rule actually disappear from the spotlight? Not in the way the internet joke suggests. He never stopped touring, never stopped releasing music, and never stopped building new ventures, from streaming apps to spirits brands. What he lost was not his career entirely, but the center of culture, the inescapable, everywhere-at-once superstardom of the early 2000s, when you could not turn on a radio or a television without hearing his voice. That fall was never caused by a single diss track. It was a pileup, a beef that embarrassed him publicly, a federal raid that froze the label carrying his career at the worst possible moment, a string of legal cases that eventually cost him 2 years of his freedom, and a scandal so viral it introduced him to an audience that had never heard his music at all. Any one of those blows on its own might have been survivable. Stacked together, in that order, they were not. He has continued booking shows well into the mid-2020s, including international festival dates, and has teased new music with a gentler, more melodic title, Can We Watch the Sunrise Together? A callback to the R&B leaning sound that made him a star in the first place, rather than an attempt to relitigate the toughness debate that helped sink him 20 years ago. It is a telling choice for an artist whose career was arguably damaged, in part, by critics who saw his softer instincts as a liability. Decades later, he seems entirely unbothered by revisiting them. Financially, most estimates put his net worth somewhere in the $4 to $6 million range today, a fraction of what an artist at his commercial peak might expect to hold onto, but stable, and increasingly built on diversified income from touring, catalog royalties, and his beverage brands rather than on chart performance or radio airplay. He is, by any reasonable measure, comfortable rather than dominant, which is a very different thing from finished. What remains, then, is not a man who vanished, but one who stepped down from the throne and kept working anyway, still touring, still selling bottles, still showing up, still argued about by fans who cannot quite agree whether he is a legend, a punchline, or somehow both at once. Forgotten artists do not generate think pieces, documentaries, and lawsuits 2 decades after their commercial peak. Ja Rule does, which is itself a strange kind of proof that he never actually left. He just stopped being the loudest voice in the room and mistook for silence what was really just someone else's turn.